Good afternoon. The Sarasota County Bar Association, through its Council for Diversity and Inclusion, is pleased to present today's interactive panel discussion. I am Karimu Hill Harvey, chairperson of the council. Today's presentation was made possible by the generous sponsorship of the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. For our Zoom participants, you will have a chance after to ask questions of our panelists. Please type your questions into the chat box. Our team will put into the queue and introduce you by name in the second half of the program to allow you to ask your questions on camera. In addition, the council would like to thank those of you who donated to the Richard Garland Memorial Scholarship Fund and to Chip Gaylor, former bar president, for arranging the matching grant. We reached our goal this year to help diverse law students with their tuition and to bring them to the Sarasota area. And now, let me introduce today's moderator, the Honorable Phyllis Galen, County Court Judge, 12th District, whom graciously volunteered to moderate this discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Judge. My name is Phyllis Galen, and I am a county judge here in Sarasota County, and I am in Division D. That includes criminal, but civil, which is relevant for today's because all the evictions that are going to be discussing today, the type of case to discuss it today. I'm actually an administrative judge as well, but I think we do have our participants of the county, I think all of the Sarasota judges and possibly some from Maryland. So it's my moderator of this event. I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to the actual members and let them give you a little bit of information about themselves. So I'll turn it over to Quintero. I think you need to unmute yourself, sir.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Judge, for the introduction. I work for the for Florida Health. I do environmental health planning, and so I work on issues relating to this topic. And also, I'm an urban planner that attended UCLA. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have as our other panel member, Linda Harradine, and my pleasure to introduce her. I think she probably is known to all of you, but I'll let you, if you're not aware of who she is and what great work she does in this community, I'll let her explain.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Linda Harradine. I'm the CEO for Legal Aid of Minnesota, our local legal aid program. We have a few staff attorneys, but as many of you know, we rely on many of you that are on the call today and the generosity of the attorneys in our community to help us meet the legal needs of the most vulnerable in our community. I've been with Legal Aid since 1997, which just seems longer when you say it. And I've been the director since actually for 20 years this year. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I look forward to getting questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harradine. The way that we're going to proceed now with this town hall meeting is we're going to go back to Mr. Ramon Quintero, and he is going to give us a historical background to the history of discrimination in housing. And he's got some very interesting information that he would like to share with us. So please, at this time, you can take over.
Thank you, Judge. So I think one of the first things to start this conversation, I think it's important to give our respects to the Native American land on which we're sitting right now, which is the Calusa people, are the ancestral people of this area. And I think we can never start this conversation without acknowledging that this is the U.S. is a settler colonial nation state. And so therefore, it's not only important to recognize that, to begin to understand this issue, but it's important to connect it to that historical fact. The history of racial discrimination in the US is very much tied to that history of colonial expansion of Europeans to these lands. And the genocide of Native Americans are part of that history. Um, from the displacement of people native to this land to the expansion of the US across a continent, it is important to connect those two things to be able to bring it forward to our present. So that's number one. Number two is the history of settler colonial colonization in the U.S. has set in place privileges for property owners, slave owners, especially in this area of the country, and the displacement of and lack of access of other people that were not considered part of the initial nation state. Next, the institutional discrimination and legacies have influenced at different points in U.S. history how institutions and politicians dealt with people that are either undesirable or not welcome into this this country. One of the key things here that I'm going to pick up is after World War II and just before World War II in the 1930s, when Roosevelt, FDR, I might say, started the New Deal in 1934. Because of this history, and even though the good intentions of FDR in the New Deal and expanding housing for a growing population of people that needed housing after World War II, those benefits were not extended specifically for people of color, specifically Black people. And so we have the institution, even though we ended slavery in the 1860s, the institution of separation really and how these benefits were extended to people were really affected by that history. And so I think one of the key things here to understand is that those benefits, FHA loans, for instance, were not given to certain people that live in certain areas of the city with redlining. And redlining is a key component of institutional discrimination, even after we had several laws protecting people of color and specifically Black people in the U.S. And so so those things have created a reality of institutional discrimination that is very much one of the many reasons why we have an unequal access to wealth creation in this country. And I think this historical context, from the displacement of Native Americans from their land to the systemic exclusion of Black people from having access to FHA loans through the legal system of redlining that was instituted by the federal government and financial institutions, has brought us to this moment on which we can see even today, after more than 300 years of that, that people of color, and specifically in Sarasota, have only below 50% of that population owns their property, compared to 77% of the white population. And so we can see this intuitively just by connecting those issues. We can understand that over time, this is made, actually it's exacerbated over time, even though there's been some improvements in the area of law, in the area of how we think about each other. But I just want to kind of just leave it at that for now. If there's any specific questions, I'll come back to it.
All righty, thank you. Are there, with that discussion of the historical perspective, are you, or do you have an awareness of other discrimination? In other words, sexual orientation, disability, economic, that sort of thing. Are those areas that you could speak to as well?
Yeah, so definitely the economic is the modern day systemic way of discriminating against people of color. If people haven't had have historically lack of access to jobs, education, and now we have a system, basically a point system where your FICO score determines whether you have access to loans, and that's perceived as being neutral. If you don't know that history, then you would think a FICO score is it's a number, so it must be fair. But the fact is that the economic discrimination is an extension of that history of racial discrimination, but it's because it basically, it doesn't name it, but so that's on the economic side. I know for a fact that there's low-income communities here in neighborhoods in Sarasota County that are being currently gentrified because financial institutions actually incentivize more affluent people to move into these neighborhoods. So that's on the economic and the financial and the role that financial institutions play, whether they're aware or not. It's institutional. Second, there is also discrimination on the basis of some landlords will not rent to people with large families for obvious reasons. They want to protect their investment, which is the home. And if you have more kids and more people living in a home, the house gets obviously more use and probably more damage. And so there is and that discrimination in itself, even though it doesn't have a name, we do know that certain populations of people do have larger families because of cultural or educational and other reasons. So there is a concern in terms of how that it's applied. Also, the ability of the different abilities of people also can have and do have an influence on how they get access to rental property, especially because not all property owners or property management companies actually have access for someone that has a wheelchair, for instance. And so that's an important concern. And yeah, so those are the main things I can definitely talk about. Thank you.
Sure. I know that we have got some people that have proposed some questions. I'm thinking we were going to come to that at the end, or do we want to address those questions at this time for before we move on to our other?
We're going to come to those questions at the end.
That's what I thought. Thanks. I just want to make sure. All righty. Then next, thank you, Mr. Quintero. Next, we're going to have Ms. Herardine give us a perspective of the looming eviction crisis that we have now. So I'll turn the microphone, so to speak, over to Ms. Herardine for her input on that and how the various factors are affecting this particular crisis.
Okay. Thank you so much. I wanted to start by reading just a really short excerpt of an article that was in NPR at the end of February this year. And the title of the article was "For Black Families, Evictions Are Still at a Crisis Point Despite the Moratorium." And I'm not going to read a 10-page article, but I do want to just read this one story because I think it really gives us some context for our conversation today. It's a simple fact. Black and brown families are more likely to be evicted than white ones. There are many reasons for this, but the pandemic has made matters worse and could widen the gap for years to come. Anaya is a case in point. She's the mother of two, unemployed, struggling to get by. By the end of this month, she has to leave her 2-bedroom apartment in Richmond, Virginia, and find a new place to live. This comes on top of an already very tough 2020. My children being home from school, trying to work, it was just a lot, she says. was a lot of pressure for me trying to figure out what we were going to do, being that now there was a whole life change, a world changed really. COVID meant that Anaya's overnight shift at a warehouse was no longer practical because her children's daycare and school were both canceled. She had to homeschool her boys whose father doesn't live with them. Anaya converted one corner of her living room into a mini classroom with colorful plastic tables and chairs, piles of books, posters with simple words for her boys ages 3 and 5 to read. Your beginner words such as home, happy, dream. Anaya started having trouble paying her rent, $650 a month, shortly after she stopped working. After that, it was pretty much they were filing lawsuits against me and trying to get me out of the unit, she says. The 24-year-old mother was able to avoid eviction with the help of a lawyer and emergency rental assistance, which covered all of the rent she owed plus future payments. So she was very surprised when she got a letter saying that her lease would not be renewed and she had to vacate the apartment by the end of the month. And again, this is not one of our current clients, but this speaks to the clients that are walking into our door every day. We're seeing these situations where people have obviously fallen on really difficult times. These were people that were already had extremely challenging life situations. And now you add this homeschooling, lack of childcare, lack of, losing employment, losing some of their transportation, all kinds of things that have gone wrong in their lives. Again, when they were already sort of in a resource challenged environment as it is. So I think that her story really highlights not just what individuals and families are currently facing, but some of the systemic challenges that we're facing as well when it comes to people in their housing. One of the things I think that I wanted to point out was that not only do we have this pending eviction crisis, but one of the most interesting things, and as I was preparing for this, was finding out that rents for poor people have actually been rising during the pandemic, which is actually exacerbating the eviction issue. And so when you look at that, you have to look at the context of this again, historically, in the short term and the long term, what factors are playing into this. So first of all, when the economic crisis hit, more people decided to maybe downgrade their housing. So you have people that say, you know what, I'm losing my job, I need to go to a smaller apartment, I need to save some money. We already have an enormous affordable housing shortage. So when you have people that are now competing for additional, for fewer spaces, obviously the supply and demand gives you an increase in the rent. Also, there's a real linear relationship between that. These housings that are at a lower price point are often homes that are for majority non-white population, so that you can see where this impact is disparate. Some lower income areas were also experiencing gentrification before the pandemic even hit. So they were already seeing a rise in rental income, rental costs. And that again was just exacerbated as more people were moving around and coming into some of these neighborhoods. One of the unintended consequences of the federal moratorium may be that landlords had to offset their losses by raising rents. And rents at low income price points tend to run at a very, very small or slim profit margin. So they're operating just at cost. In order to cover their costs and some of their losses, there was a subsequent increase. So this would all be contrary to what you think in the middle of a pandemic, but these are things that families have been facing. One of the other issues, again, that has come up is poor tenants are often much more reluctant to push back on a rent hike. They know the challenges of trying to find another housing unit, of trying to move, trying to find an affordable housing unit. And if you can't pay this month's rent, how on earth are you going to pay first, last, and security to go into another place? So they tend to just accept the rental increase because they don't feel like they have a choice. These factors disproportionately impact Black families because they're more likely to rent. They tend to have smaller financial emergency resources set aside for this type of situation. They tend to pay a higher percentage of their income goes towards their rent and their housing. They were also more likely to lose their jobs due to COVID. They had a higher percentage of people that lost their jobs, and COVID itself, people of color are 3 times more likely to end up hospitalized if they were stricken with COVID. And obviously that puts you out of a job, and then you add all these medical expenses on. So although some of these issues predate the pandemic, a lot of these are newer issues and have just been exacerbated. And it's creating these disadvantages that are almost insurmountable. And we're not sure how people are going to overcome this at this point. So I think we not only need to look at the short term, but we also need to look at these systemic challenges that have been created over time. And what do we do in the short term, but also what are we going to do in the long term? Because this is again, I think we're at a tipping point. Just some statistics and background, because I think, again, it's somewhat shocking when you hear the numbers of how this impacts family, especially Black and Brown families. Black and Brown families are more likely to be evicted than white ones. It's difficult to find local data on this, but there's a lot of nationwide data out there on this. Between 2012 and 2016, Black renters comprised a disproportionate share of evictions relative to their share of the renter population. So according to the eviction lab at Princeton, you have individuals making up, Black individuals are making up 21% of the renters, and yet they make up 35% of the defendants in eviction cases. So again, there's this disproportionate impact. This does not take into account renters whose lease are not renewed, like the story I read at the beginning, Anaya, or clients who just say, you know what, I don't want an eviction on my record. I know I'm not going to be able, and they just leave. So those are just cases you can't track. There's no real way to track that. In addition, when you take a look at the back rent and the amount of back rent that is owed, it is disproportionately Black, Brown, and Asian families that owe a significantly more amount of back rent than white families do. This just adds to a greater housing instability, not again just in the short term, but also in the long term. There have been some studies and some some census data that has come out that said 56%, up to 56% of Black renters are also stating that they're likely to leave their homes within the next 2 months because of eviction or threat of eviction. That was at the end of February. So we're talking in the next 2 months, you have that many people who are living on the edge that we know of. The Florida Coalition Center for Racial Equity is kind of a newer entity, but it's really great if anybody has time and wants to look into that. And they have a lot of materials and information about housing discrimination and home ownership and all types of things and how this is played out over the years. But one of the things that struck me when I was going through some of their materials is that it's a common misperception that poverty is the strongest predictor of homelessness. Homelessness is rooted in segregation and a history of discriminatory housing practices and housing, banking, and criminal justice systems. So again, you see this stream of racial, disparities and how this is impacting people, again, not just now, but also as we move forward. And this is just systemic things that have to be dealt with. As a result, we have Black people experience homelessness at a higher rate than compared to white counterparts in every state in the nation. African Americans represent 40% of people experiencing homelessness and 52% of people experiencing homelessness in families with children, yet they only make up 13% of the general population. So these numbers are really telling when you look at that data. Florida is no exception. Black persons comprise almost 40% of people experiencing homelessness in Florida, and yet they only comprise 16% of the population. So as you look at this, and as I get into my next part where I talk about what we're seeing here in our local community, I think it's really evident that a lot of these issues are based on historic discrimination, policies, and just things that are not going to go away easily. These are things that are going to have to be looked at for years from a variety of angles and have some real in-depth conversations in order to fix these things. So what are we seeing at Legal Aid? We have seen over 100% increase in clients seeking our services for housing issues. I will tell you that, and I believe Judge Galen had pulled up some numbers herself. We had done a brief survey of the clerk's dockets, and in 2018, 2019, there were approximately each year 5,000 evictions filed. And we did not comb through every eviction to see the purpose. This was just to give us an overview and a baseline. Yet in 2020, the number was about 27 to 2,800 filed. That doesn't mean they went anywhere. They might have been filed. They might have been commercial. So again, but it's about half of what you would expect in an average year. But we know that a lot of evictions were not filed specifically because of the CDC moratorium. So we don't really have a picture of where we're at locally. And because we've asked a lot, what's this going to look like when we fall off the cliff? We don't know. We really don't. The CDC moratorium is set to expire at the end of this month, about a week from today. And then what? Those are the conversations that we're having with the social service agencies, with the community foundations, with the counties to try to figure out what comes next. So we've been fortunate because we've had this sort of two-pronged safety net in place. We've had the CDC moratorium, which was the Centers for Disease Control put into place, issued an order temporary halting residential evictions to prevent the further spread of COVID. And basically, the premise for this was that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Social distancing is imperative in order to stem the spread of this disease, and dispossessing people of their housing is opposite and contrary to what we would want to do. And so the CDC issued this moratorium, which again has been very helpful, but there's two things that have to take place. One, clients have to know about it, and you'd be surprised. I mean, most of us may have heard about it. Not everyone has heard about it. Not everyone understands it. Two, there's affirmative steps the tenants actually have to take in order to qualify for it. There's qualifications, and they have to take affirmative steps. It's not an automatic defense. And so those are sort of the first hurdles that we're overcoming. So the CDC moratorium went into effect September 4th, I believe. It was set to expire just the end of December, and then it was again continued a couple of times. And right now we're looking at a March 31st cutoff. Our understanding is that it may be extended, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But people have had questions: if you're not really working in this area, how do you qualify for this? And so I'll just go through a real brief list of what would qualify someone under this. Again, so first of all, the tenant has to present a signed declaration to their landlord. And what they're saying, that they have to lay out the reasons that they would qualify for this. One, they have to assure that they're making their best efforts to obtain all government or rental or housing assistance that's available to them. So they have to state that they're doing everything they can to find housing and rental assistance. There's certain income limits that they have to meet. They have to be unable to pay their rent in full because of substantial loss in household income, loss of hours, maybe it's reduced work hours, or some kind of extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses, so hospitalization from COVID or something else. They have to make their best efforts to make timely partial payments as close to the full payment amount. Someone owes $1,000 a month, but their hours have been reduced and they can afford $800. They have to swear that they are going to make at least the $800 payment and still, try to avail themselves of whatever rental assistance is available to them. They also have to, in the same declaration, that they have to state that if they were to be evicted, they would likely be homeless, or they would need to move into a homeless shelter, or they would have to move into a residence that would be shared by other people, which again is contrary to what the CDC is trying to do, which is minimize close contact. They also have to understand that they must still pay rent and make housing payments. They also have to comply with the rest of the lease agreement. So this doesn't diminish the rest of the contract that they signed in their lease agreement. They still can be evicted for other reasons. And lastly, they have to understand that they still owe the rent. This does not reduce the amount owed. There can still be late fees and charges and penalties for months covered by the moratorium, and it does not excuse this payment. So all of these things are the requirements of the moratorium and have to be laid out and signed and again presented to the landlord. We know sometimes this will go in front of the judges, who will then maybe go through this step by step and question the clients. And, is this really the case? Is it so? I know a lot of people say, oh, no one's getting evicted right now. That it's not that simple. It really isn't. They have to take some affirmative steps. The second sort of prong of our safety net right now is rental assistance. And so you have the CDC moratorium preventing people from actually being evicted. And then you have rental assistance because obviously landlords need to get paid, and we understand that. So to qualify for rental assistance, they have to have at least one person in the household who qualifies for unemployment or has experienced some other financial hardship during or because of COVID. So it has to be directly tied to COVID. They have to be at risk of being homeless or experiencing housing instability and make less than 80% of the area's median income. And in the Tampa Bay area, that's roughly $56,000 for a family of 4. So that sort of gives you an idea of who's qualifying for this. There's been about 3 pots of, notwithstanding a lot of local efforts that have been made. I certainly don't want to diminish, the season of sharing and JFCS. There's a lot of local agencies that are doing their best to pool together resources for our community and have made an enormous difference. But the big pots of money really are coming from the federal government. And those have been the CARES Act, the December Relief Bill, and now most recently, the American Rescue Plan Act. That money can be used for up to 12 months of back rent, as well as utility payments. So again, if you're someone who lost your job for 6 or 8 months and you're already living on the border of, making it paycheck to paycheck, the chances of you coming up with 6 months of back rent is near impossible. It's like chances of me winning the lottery. So we have to give these people and the landlords, make sure that they get the back rent, get caught up as they get back on their feet. It can also pay future rent. So it's a real opportunity for people to try to get back on their feet, to stay housed, get landlords caught up on the money that's owed to them. So our biggest issues right now are there's large challenges to these safety nets. So these have kind of been in place and we've been going along, but the rental assistance programs are very cumbersome to access. There's a lot of significant documentation that is required. This is a federal program. Need I say more? This is not simple. There's differing ways that states and local agencies and governments are actually administering this. So it can differ from one location to another. There's a significant delay from the time when the money trickles down from the federal government to the states and then gets down out on the ground to the local county and city governments. So for example, right now, Sarasota County has 13 million in rental assistance fund. However, there's no means to disperse that funding as of today. And again, this is an enormous lift for the county and the city because they have to have the manpower and the resources to get this up and running. And yet, if the moratorium expires before clients are able to access this, the safety net is gone. So again, so that's the first sort of challenge to our 2-pronged safety net. The second challenge is the CDC moratorium that's set to expire 1 week from today. There was a proposed extension for this that went to the Office of Management and Budget for regulatory review at the end of last week. We're just waiting to see right now what happens with that. As anyone who's followed this at all will know, that tends to be very close to the last minute. We get notification of the extension, so I don't expect to hear anything too soon. This was a move that was supported by the AARP, the NAACP, ACLU, which also cited the fact that evictions probably have caused an additional 400,000 COVID cases. So it's really tied into COVID and the ramifications of having people be unhoused or not in safe housing during the pandemic. Our biggest concern really is that both of these safety nets are only good if we have them both. We need the extension of a moratorium to give people time. We need the rental assistance to be able to pay rent, both back rent as well as rent into the future. And so right now we're kind of at this crossroads where we don't know if the CDC moratorium is going to be extended and we don't necessarily have access to the rental assistance funds. So we don't really know what's going to happen. And yes, most of you know that I am a lawyer, but I'm not boots on the ground lawyer in court. So I don't want to overstep my knowledge base, but there are obviously legal challenges right now to the CDC moratorium, which are also out there. There's two federal courts have recently ruled in separate cases that the moratorium exceeds the CDC's authority. The Department of Justice has said it will appeal. We follow the National Housing Law Project, and their director of litigation is really on top of this, and we follow a lot of their policies and updates as to what's going on. And basically, he's saying his inbox is filled daily with legal scholars and lawyers and law professors who are all giving him differing opinions on what this means. And there's so much confusion because of the unprecedented nature of the moratorium, and that the legal avenue used to challenge it is typically used for regulations that haven't yet taken effect. And so this is not a simple area at all, but I think the most important thing that I got out of following the National Housing Law Project is what he says. This is why tenants should be appointed lawyers if they're facing an eviction right now. If law professors and experienced federal litigators can't agree on what these things mean, how are individual tenants supposed to defend themselves? And that's really our concern, is that our clients do not, some of them don't even know this exists. How are they supposed to go in and meaningfully represent themselves and defend themselves in an eviction action right now? And I hope I'm not right. I'm almost done, Judge. So if I'm going too long, let me know.
Yep.
Okay, I'm trying to talk fast. So obviously we're really concerned, not just with this cliff that we're facing next week, which is a real short-term looming eviction crisis. We don't know what's going to happen next week if one of those two prongs fails. But there's also real long-term implications for our community that I think people need to be aware of. We have families that are going into debt right now, that are taking out loans, using credit cards, who are selling off personal belongings just to preserve their housing, because there's a shortage of affordable housing. And obviously that's the last thing people want to do, is to become homeless or have nowhere to go. And so they're putting a lot of other stuff on the line. But what's going to happen is when they go to rent a new place, they are now debt burdened. Most landlords pull a credit check. So now you have debt burdened clients who may not pass a credit check, and they may not be able to afford to pay those back, but they're just desperate and trying to keep themselves and their families housed. The second issue is that once an eviction is filed, that's public record. Whether or not it goes anywhere, it doesn't matter. The first thing landlords tend to do when they're going to rent to a tenant is they go to the court doc and they want to see, has this person ever been evicted before? What is their history? And so if you have all of these families that have these evictions on their record, this is going to make rehousing families and individuals into the future very, very difficult. So I'll start to wrap it up now a little bit. I just think this is why it's so important. We need attorneys to jump in. We need the community to understand as a whole, to get involved sooner rather than later. We really don't have any time to wait. We need to prevent this tsunami of evictions if at all possible. And also look, again, systemically, what can we do in our community to change the course of direction that we're on? It's not only the right thing to do, but it's fiscally responsible. It's a lot more expensive to rehouse and shelter a family and then rehouse them than to keep them housed in the first place. Not to mention the other implications, the other consequences to families, such as the breakdown of the family. You can lose your job, you lose transportation sometimes because you're uprooted so many times. And the biggest impact is children. The kids that are in school that are being displaced, they already are having a difficult time this year. It's even under the best of circumstances, but these children are facing some real challenges because of this. So again, I guess what I'll end on is some of you may have been, this is our 30th anniversary, so we're very excited about that. But 5 years ago, on our 25th anniversary, we were really fortunate. We had Brian Stevenson come in, and hopefully everyone has heard of him. And if not, please call me because we need to talk. He's phenomenal. And a lot of his work is really around criminal justice reform, but a lot of his messaging is equally as pertinent on the civil side as well. And so we actually have some of his quotes on our wall in our conference room because he really has some words of wisdom and remind us of why we're doing this every day. And so I just picked one of his quotes that I wanted to end on. That you ultimately judge the civility of a society, not by how it treats the rich, the powerful, the protected, and the highly esteemed, but how it treats the poor, the disfavored, and the disadvantaged. And I think that's where we are now. at this crossroads, and we need to see what we can do as a community, and which direction are we going to take.
Thank you, Ms. Teradyne. In speaking to the numbers that you mentioned, I did, as Ms. Teradyne said, I did pull some numbers from the clerks to just get an idea. And I'll give you some of the parameters. I don't have, let me just say, for residential eviction cases that were from March 13th to December 31st. And I agree with Ms. Teradyne. I think that sometimes evictions were not filed because they knew of the moratorium, and they had the, we had all of the moratoriums, whether it was through the governor, the Supreme Court, CDC, and the extensions. But from March 13th through December 31st, a 9-month total, we had residential eviction cases that the clerk in Sarasota County said was 572. From January 1st to present, and present being probably 2 days ago, the residential eviction cases from January 1st to the 2 days ago was 232 total. I then asked, well, from the residential evictions that have been since March 13th, how many writs of possession were issued on those? And it ended up, they gave me the total of 289. And I randomly looked, and a lot of that was obviously things that happened after we had the moratoriums, this CARES Act, other things that had ended, and then we had the new CDC come out. But what we saw is that in these writs of possession cases, and it's the latter part of the year when it was permitted, that they were a lot of just defaults. They weren't people that had any idea that there was the CDC moratorium, or that they could do the declaration. And so that is the vast majority of what I saw when I just randomly selected a couple cases here. The idea that the 12th Circuit, Sarasota County, we're operating under, obviously, the CDC moratorium, as Ms. Teradyne said, that is going to expire as it is now, as of March 31st. We're operating under our administrative order from Judge Bonner, which is the latest, is Administrative Order 2020-15E.1. That can be found on the 12th Circuit Judicial Court website under administrative orders, and it does go through the history and the how we've gotten to where we are, and it still does only affect those for non-payment of rent cases. It doesn't affect others. So now we all are realizing that March has come, a year has come and gone, and now those that were evictions for non-payment of rent are now evictions for holdover tenancies, because now the lease has expired. They haven't renewed it because they haven't gotten any money from them, so they're not going to renew it, and they're giving their notices. And so they're pursuing an eviction for holdover tenancies or other issues. Are you seeing that, Ms. Teradyne, in your cases? Are you seeing those start to trickle in?
We haven't really seen that yet, but I do want to speak to the fact about the defaults, which you brought up, because I will tell you, we've had clients come in who have said after the fact, after the eviction and the rent is already done, I don't understand. There's an eviction moratorium. They weren't supposed to be able to evict me. And it's because they had no idea. They didn't know it required affirmative steps. And by the time they came to us, it was too late. The deal was done. All we could try to do at that point is to try to help them, find some rehousing. So I do think the defaults, that's a really important point to make, is that not everybody, we're in this world. I think probably most of the people on this call have an interest in it or are in this world. And we have some understanding if we're not doing eviction work day to day, but this is not out in the community. People don't understand. And there's people who just think, oh, there's a moratorium, no one can be evicted right now. And that is really not the case or the reality.
It's true. And even before the moratoriums and whatnot, people wouldn't read their summons to say what they needed to do. I mean, I think it's too frightening. It's too much of an emotional almost want to put my head in the sand type of situation. They don't read it and they don't comprehend it like we would in the legal community. But that is true. I'm sure that people had no idea. This is just a moratorium and why am I being evicted? But they don't respond. So what we're getting as judges are different. We have, as you've mentioned, we have as judges had people come in that have filed a declaration or are alleging that they have given it to the landlord. So as judges, we will hold hearings, and that's something that's permitted by our administrative order, Judge Bonner's order. Sometimes the landlords challenge it because of those steps you described, Ms. Herdine, where they do have to affirmatively say, I'm making my best efforts to get this housing money. And some have done that. They have. I've had them where they, and I know Judge Moss has had them last year when it was down, she was down in Venice, and the other judges have too, where they have actually gone through and gotten, and my recollection was the county, the person that went through and took a lot of the applications was Wayne Appleby at the county of Sarasota. He then forwarded that application, which went to Karen Rushing because she's comptroller, and she had requirements, and they would take a check, and they would sometimes get a $10,000 check. Interesting in the eviction context, as we all know, normally speaking, if someone who has an eviction, a landlord has an eviction, accepts money during the course of an eviction, then that can then basically cause that eviction to be null and void, if you will. So in some of the instances where I've had hearings, and the other judges may want to speak to this if they'd like to, is that I say, all right, there is this money. That's going directly to the applicant. It's not going to the landlord. That the tenant can then give it to the landlord, and the landlord agrees to receive money from the tenant, and that would not in any way affect the viability of the eviction. And that's happened where I've had people just accept it, and I'll do an order saying that they don't have to put the money in the registry because it's from usually the CARES Act or what other revenue, but it would go directly, and we do it as of whatever date that they say they'll get it to it. So we've had those issues, but we also had the issues where people haven't made any diligent efforts to pay anything. And so it's a process that we all go through, but you're right on the idea that we do try to inquire and at least pull from the people, what have they done that is required, and if they have, then that then satisfies us for that, the CDC moratorium, and the cases are stayed. My cases are stayed until such time as the moratorium is over or extended further out. Right now, what I have in my hand in my office are 12 cases that I have been holding. 12. The other judges have different numbers, but those are because we have determined they are valid stayed cases. Is that going to balloon to a greater number? You know, now that the moratorium is potentially going to get extended, I don't know. You know, you just really don't know. But the numbers that we have, and I have one number that I wanted to share. Residential eviction cases from the clerk's office with no activity, none, they're in open status and no activity other than the complaint was filed, the summons were issued. Since March 13th is 337 of those cases. Now, what's going to happen to those? I don't know. Who's going to act on those? But that's still out there too. So we have these looming numbers that you referenced, Ms. Herdine, that do, in fact, give us all concern about moving forward and how we're going to handle that. So what with legal aid, why are the attorneys so important to this process, Ms. Herdine?
I think it goes back to sort of my last point, is that there is so much confusion right now as to who is protected, how are they protected, and you know, there's a lot of frustration. And I'm the first one to admit, obviously, we're representing tenants, but we understand that their landlords have a right to be paid and they're owed this funding. So we understand the frustration on both sides. And so I think sometimes having an attorney get involved, they can help maybe stipulate to something. It gives the landlord maybe a little more confidence that, listen, okay, I can negotiate with them in good faith. Maybe I can stipulate to this. And so we found that in those cases where maybe we've had a client who couldn't come up with all of the rent and they're waiting, because obviously there was a delay in the CARES funding as well. They didn't get it the next day, their $6,000 check. It was a process. Their paperwork had to be approved. But if you have an attorney telling the landlord or the landlord's attorney, listen, this is in process, this is going on, the application's been filed, it just sort of, it helps the process along. I think it helps prevent it from maybe getting in front of the court. You can negotiate a little bit better, or maybe have better outcomes and stipulations that you probably aren't going to get if it's a tenant and a landlord who are already probably pretty heated and emotional with the past year.
No, I agree. I personally think that your office has done a phenomenal job, because I have had those stipulations where they would say, yes, we do have this coming and it will be. Here's the date and time. So I think it's excellent, what you are doing. We have Michelle Steppen, who is also someone that we need to talk to, because I think we have some information that you'd like to share with the whole group of us about what can be done here, and give us a little information how members of the Sarasota County Bar Association, what they can do to help.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I am with the Sarasota County Bar Association Access to Justice Task Force, and it's a new task force that was formulated this year, and our goal is to encourage and nurture pro bono participation within the Sarasota County Bar Association, and to provide that information to the attorneys who have the knowledge and ability to assist, in providing access to justice to the, lower income populations, to kind of make it less mysterious. Access to justice is providing people with the tools they need to navigate our legal system, which we all know how to do. We would be able to dig through the forms that are required to, make it through the CDC requirements, formulate an answer to an eviction complaint, so that instances such as the defaults that both Judge Galen and Linda have spoken about don't happen. Because a default in an eviction case with a low-income family is a denial of access to justice, which is what we have all gone to law school to prevent. The one thing that I think is very important for attorneys to understand is that legal aid has programs to assist that aren't going to be just taking a case. So you can sign up with legal aid to assist. There's a program right now called FACE, which is Florida Attorneys Counseling on Eviction. And through that program, you can spend an hour doing an intake. Legal aid will train you on what on the CDC requirements. They'll train you on how to formulate an answer to an eviction complaint. And start to finish, it might take you 3 hours of time. So by calling legal aid, getting on their list to assist, you're not agreeing to take a full case, unless you want to. But you can help in small segments of time that will fit into your practice. And a lot of us are coming from different practice areas, but the eviction process is not rocket science. If we can navigate our own practice area, we can navigate an eviction. And legal aid actually has, I think it's a 2-hour video that will walk you through the process. So one way that we can help is to get in touch with legal aid, perhaps Seneca Legal Services down in Venice as well. Get on the list to help when they need help. Another way that you can assist is that if you are in the property law world and you do have knowledge of these areas, you can ask, sign up to be a mentor to help people that don't have the knowledge in the particular practice area, to walk them through the process so that we can broaden our nets and get more people on the ground that are actually helping people with the forms. the goal of providing access to justice is to help people facing legal issues have timely and affordable access to the legal help they need, both on a procedural and a substantive level. And we can certainly all assist with that. The number for Legal Aid of Minnesota is 941-366-0038. Again, it's 941-366-0038. And if we contact them now, we get on the list as a referral source. As the eviction moratorium lifts, there are going to be needs for, perhaps mediators. We discussed a little bit today about the importance of keeping an eviction off of your record, about, helping to do something with the back due rent, because that is just going to push or snowball the problem. Because once you have an eviction on your record, it's going to be harder to get a new place. If you have debt, you're not going to be able, to pass the credit requirements, and the problem continues and it blossoms.
And I just want to interrupt here. Thank you to our speakers. We are running a little bit low on time. We've got a few questions from the audience that we want to try to get to. The first question, we're going to allow Ms. Mac Maka. I'm going to spotlight your video, and I'm going to ask you to unmute shortly, and you'll get on video to be able to ask your question directly. I believe this question is going to be directed to Mr. Quintero, and here we go.
Hi, Mr. Quintero. I was wondering what your thoughts were regarding some of the John Nolan urban plans for places like St. Petersburg and Venice, Florida, based as they were on the concept of racial zoning, in light of the fact that that practice was banned in 1917 by the Supreme Court of the United States. I wanted to know if this is just a ivory tower discussion for folks that like me, or is this something that you see in your work currently?
Thank you for the question. I don't know the specifics of that project, but I do want to state that it's important to bring those discussions of systemic historical relevance to the contemporary moment in which we are operating, because it's very difficult right now to, for a lot of people to connect the practices of today to the history of discrimination. But it's sorry, I can't elaborate on that project, but I do agree with you. I think that we need to think about our past so that we can create a new path forward.
Thank you for that. We
And
have
thank you.
any other.
We do, and let's get to Jay Castle. He's got a question. He is next in line. So let me get his, we'll get his microphone going. And Jay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you. This has been very fascinating. Linda talked a little bit about some of the programs that are available through state and local as well as federal. They all sounded mostly along the lines of rent assistance. And my question, anyone who lives in Sarasota knows this, there's just a profound shortage of affordable housing. Are any of the programs, or can you talk a little bit more about any of the programs that are going to do anything about trying to increase the inventory of affordable housing? And then more importantly, kind of talking about what lawyers can do, usually those programs have quite a bit of complex requirements for people to try to comply with. What can we do to try to help people access those programs?
Maybe best for Ms. Herardine to speak to that.
Yeah. I can tell you, I do know that affordable housing is an enormous issue. It is not really kind of under our umbrella. However, we try to stay in touch with that because we're constantly referring our clients to any agencies and social service agencies that may be working on those issues. We work very closely with the Suncoast Partnership to end homelessness. And I will say one of the things that legal aid does do that people may not realize is we do have a community council project, which is attorneys that want to maybe do something in affordable housing with nonprofits that are working on that issue. We may be able to partner the agency with an attorney who has an interest in that through our community council project. It's basically providing legal assistance to nonprofits that couldn't afford to hire a counsel, or it would be a stretch on their budget. Again, if this is going to increase affordable housing in our community, and this is going to be something that is going to house our clients and help with some of these systemic discriminatory practices, then we certainly would want to help facilitate that in any way. And I know the community foundations have been very involved in those discussions, as have the county and the city as well.
We're going to have one more question from the audience, and then Judge Galen, we can have you wrap up after that. This question, and it looks like the person who asked it, oh, there we go. Miss Buckend, I'm going to get you to, there we go. Got you on camera. You can ask your question now.
Okay. Thank you so much. My question is, why isn't there more help for residents of public housing, which now they have all different programs, the RAD and so forth. Many residents have went to legal aid and they've been turned away. So during the COVID and all that, the judge is right, you know, it was held off from eviction, but now they are trying to continue to evict these people, which they have paid their rent, and it's only gonna make them homeless. But it's hard to find someone to represent them, and also with intimidation from the housing authority. You know, how are we supposed to keep people from being homeless when they have no help?
I'm happy to speak to that, Judge, if you'd like me to.
Sure.
We absolutely agree there needs to be more support and resources for people that are in public housing. Unfortunately, Legal Aid of Minnesota, we only have a very small number of staff attorneys, and they each sort of have their little niche. So the bulk of what our resources are volunteer attorneys. And unfortunately, most private attorneys don't have the expertise in public housing for us to be able to send them these cases because they can be very complex. We do have a few volunteers that are very well trained and well versed in this. We try to help as many people as we can. We see the need, we know the needs out there, and you know, we'd love to build some more resources on that because I agree this is just another part of the systemic problems that we're facing. It's not just private landlord tenant, but it's also in public housing that we're seeing these issues.
I agree, and I do think I have seen several of the attorneys from Legal Aid of Minnesota step in for public housing, but I agree, and I think the point's well made, what Ms. Devon said about this FACE project, where Florida attorneys can get the training they need for it, and then provide the pro bono attorney service to those that legal aid can't necessarily handle the volume and or Seneca down in Venice. But I think it's incumbent on us as attorneys to try to learn that area to help with a community that we obviously are seeing definitely suffer from the lack of funding for additional attorneys in those areas that can help. But I do know that Legal Aid of Minnesota does a fantastic job on those housing cases that I've had. They've really done it, and it is a different animal, if you will, as far as it goes, as far as a residential eviction. It is a little bit more complicated, but it's like, I think Ms. Stevenson, or it could have been Ms. Sheridan said, it's not necessarily rocket science. I mean, we can figure this out. There's statutes that go along with it, so we can do this. So I want to thank everybody for their participation. It's been my pleasure to to act as moderator, and I just think there's a lot of good information. So thank you all for being in attendance. I'd like to turn it back over now to Judge Hill Harvey for some closing remarks. Judge?
Thank you. We'd like to thank the panelists, our moderator, as well as the viewers. We will post a link to this video to the Sarasota County Bar Association Facebook page, and we will also have it available for reviewing in the Sarasota County Bar Association YouTube channel. We welcome your comments and continue dialogue. And don't forget to like it and share it with your friends and colleagues. If we have piqued your interest, please consider becoming an active member of the Council for Diversity and Inclusion. We welcome new members and new perspectives. Thanks again for the Community Foundation of Sarasota County for sponsoring today's presentation. And thank you again for joining. Have a great afternoon.